My daughter-in-law told the judge I was confused. She did it in a soft voice, with both hands folded on the table, like she was explaining a difficult truth to a child. "Your Honor, Frank is a good man," Kristen said. "But he is 70 years old. He was recently hospitalized. He is grieving his wife, and he has become increasingly unable to make sound decisions about vehicles, money, and his home." My son Daniel sat beside her in a navy suit that did not fit him the way it used to. His shoulders had rounded inward. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He would not look at me. Kristen kept going. He became very upset over a pickup truck he had already agreed to sell. He forgot the conversation. Then he accused us of stealing from him. "We are only trying to protect him from himself." Protect him from himself. That was the line she had practiced. I sat at the respondent's table in my brown jacket, the same one Ruth used to brush lint from before church, and I did not yell. I did not argue. I said absolutely nothing. That was their first mistake. My lawyer, Helen Carter, stood slowly. She was 63, gray-haired, calm, and precise. The kind of woman who could make a room quieter just by opening a folder. She placed a manila file on the table. Then she placed a vehicle title beside it. "Original. Clean. In my name only." The judge leaned forward. Kristen's mouth tightened. Daniel finally lifted his head, and when he saw that title, the color left his face. Helen cleared her throat. "Your Honor," she said, "before Mrs. Miller continues describing my client as confused, I believe the court should hear what was recorded inside the pickup truck she claims he voluntarily sold." Kristen turned toward Daniel. Daniel looked like a man who had just heard the first shovel of dirt hit his own coffin, because he knew what was on that recording. And so did I. Before I tell you how they learned what my silence really meant, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever had to stand up to an ungrateful family member without losing your dignity, hit the like button and subscribe. To understand how we got there, you have to go back to the day I came home from the hospital and found my driveway empty. I had spent 6 nights at Street Matthews with pneumonia sitting in my chest like wet concrete. At 70, a man learns not to pretend he is stronger than his lungs. I had worked outside most of my life. I owned a small contracting business for 38 years. I raised one son. I buried both my parents. I held my wife's hand through 2 years of cancer while she apologized for needing help, as if love was something a person had to earn by staying healthy. But that pneumonia scared me, not because I thought I was dying, because for the first time since Ruth passed, I woke up in a white hospital room where nobody knew how I took my coffee. Nobody knew I hated the television left on after 10, and nobody called me stubborn with tenderness in their voice. My neighbor, Earl Haskins, picked me up from the hospital. Earl was 76, drove 5 miles under the speed limit, and believed every problem in America started when men stopped fixing their own lawnmowers. He brought me a thermos of coffee and one of Ruth's old quilts from the hall closet because he said hospitals made a man feel rented. I was weak enough to let him help me into the car. That bothered me more than I admitted. When we turned onto my street, I saw the maple tree first. Ruth planted it 30 years ago when Daniel was 8. She said every home needed something that grew slowly and stayed longer than arguments. Then I saw the mailbox, leaning a little like it always had. Then the porch. Then the empty space beside the garage. My pickup was gone. I do not mean a new pickup. I do not mean one of those polished things men buy to prove they still have something to prove. I mean my 1979 Ford F-150, dark green, rebuilt engine, bench seat, chrome bumper, and a long scratch on the passenger door from the time Ruth misjudged the side of the garage and blamed the garage for being built too close to the driveway. That truck was the last machine Ruth and I restored together. After I sold my contracting business, I thought retirement would feel like rest. It did not. It felt like being handed a long afternoon with no instructions. Ruth saw that before I did. One Saturday morning, she walked out to the driveway holding 2 cups of coffee and said, "Frank, either fix that old truck or fix your attitude. I can live with grease." I cannot live with you sighing at the kitchen sink all day. So we fixed the truck. I did the heavy work. Ruth labeled parts in sandwich bags, held the flashlight wrong, and asked questions she already knew the answers to just to keep me talking. That pickup had hauled lumber for the back porch. It had carried Daniel's first bicycle. It had taken Ruth to chemo when she was too proud to let me buy a newer car with softer seats. And after she died, there were mornings when I would sit behind the wheel without starting it, just because the cab still smelled faintly of peppermint gum, old leather, and her hand lotion. Earl stopped the car in my driveway. He looked at the empty space. Then he looked at me. Maybe Daniel took it in for service, he said. I knew he had not. My garage side door was locked, but the keypad light was blinking red. That was wrong. Ruth and I had used the same code for years, Daniel's birthday backward. Maybe that was sentimental. Maybe it was foolish. Sometimes those are the same thing. I punched in the code. Nothing. Earl said, You want me to stay? No, I said. I need to sit with this a minute. He gave me that look old men give each other when both understand a storm has arrived, but neither wants to insult the other by naming the rain. Inside, my house was too clean. That was the first thing I noticed. My coffee mug was not by the sink. The stack of mail that usually sat on the kitchen table was gone. Ruth's cardigan had been moved from the back of the chair to a hanger in the hall closet. A small thing, maybe. But grief is built out of small things. Move one, and the whole room changes. There was a note on the counter in Kristen's handwriting. Dad, we handled a few things while you were recovering. Don't worry. It's time to simplify. Kristen had never called me Dad unless she wanted something. I sat at the kitchen table because my legs were still weak. My discharge papers were folded in my jacket pocket. I had antibiotics, a rescue inhaler, and a doctor's order to avoid stress. I almost laughed at that. 20 minutes later, Daniel came through the front door without knocking. He was 42, with gray starting at his temples, but for half a second I saw him at 12, running across that same porch, with muddy shoes and a bleeding elbow, trying not to cry because he wanted to be brave for me. That memory hurt more than anything he said next. Dad, he said, you're home early. Not, thank God you're home. Not, how are you feeling? You're home early. Kristen stepped in behind him wearing a beige coat and the careful expression of a woman who had already decided she was the only adult in the room. I looked at Daniel. Where is my pickup? Daniel glanced at Kristen. That glance told me there was a script. Kristen answered for him. We took care of it, Frank. You don't need to worry about that truck anymore. That was not my question. Daniel swallowed. Dad, you agreed. At the hospital. You said it was time. I looked at my son for a long moment. No, I did not. Kristen sighed softly. It was a polished sigh. Not irritated enough to be rude. Just tired enough to make me look difficult. Frank, you were confused in the hospital. That is normal after illness. You probably don't remember agreeing. Daniel nodded, but his eyes stayed on the floor. Kristen stepped closer to the table. At your age, memories feel real even when they aren't. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not anger. Something older than anger. She was not just telling me they sold my truck. She was telling me she had found the weapon she planned to use. My age. My grief. My hospital stay. My silence. I said, who bought it? Daniel said, a man from over in Carver County. It was a fair price. How much? Kristen answered again. $16,000 cash. That truck was worth more than that. But money was not the wound. You had no title, I said. Daniel blinked. Kristen's mouth tightened just a little. Daniel said, we had a bill of sale. You had no title, I repeated. Kristen folded her arms. The title can be replaced. Daniel is your son. This is family property. I looked at her then. Family property, I said slowly, is usually the phrase people use right before they steal something that has one owner. Daniel flinched. Kristen did not. She placed both palms on my table, Ruth's table, and leaned forward. Frank, Independence is admirable until it becomes a danger to everyone around you. We are trying to help you transition into a safer stage of life. You cannot cling to every object Ruth touched and call it dignity. That was the second time she used my wife as a tool. I looked down at her hands on the wood. Ruth and I had bought that table used in 1984. Daniel had carved his initials underneath it with a pocket knife when he was 9. Ruth made him sand the whole tabletop as punishment. He complained for 3 hours, then fell asleep with sawdust in his hair. He had been a good boy once. That is what makes betrayal heavy. It does not come from strangers. It comes wearing a face you taught to ride a bike. I stood slowly. Kristen watched me like I might fall. I did not. I walked to the hall, opened the closet, took Ruth's cardigan off the hanger, and draped it back over the kitchen chair. Then I turned to Daniel. "Bring me every paper you used to sell my truck." He said, "Dad, don't make this ugly." I looked at him. "I did not make this ugly." Kristen said, "We'll come back when you're calmer." They left. Daniel did not hug me. He did not ask if I had eaten. He followed his wife out like a man leaving a scene before the sirens. I stood in the kitchen until their car backed out of my driveway. Then I locked the door. I did not call the police that night. I did not call Daniel. I did not shout into the empty house. I made tea because Ruth always said tea made a man slow down long enough to stop being foolish. Then I opened the junk drawer where old receipts, batteries, birthday candles, and house keys went to die. Under a stack of takeout menus, I found a folded copy of a bill of sale. My name was typed at the top. Seller, Frank Miller. Buyer, Roy Blanchard. Vehicle, 1,979. Ford F-150. Sale price, $16,000. And at the bottom, someone had signed my name. It looked like my signature if you had only seen it once. But I had been signing estimates, permits, checks, and contracts for nearly 50 years. A man knows the slope of his own name. This signature was too careful, too pretty, too traced. I stood there looking at it until I remembered the birthday card. 3 years earlier, Daniel had given me a framed card for Father's Day. He was going through a sentimental season back then, or maybe he had needed money soon after. It is hard to tell now. The card had a photograph of him and me standing beside the pickup when he was 16. He had grease on his cheek and that proud smile boys get when a father finally trusts them with a wrench. Under the photograph he had written, "Thanks for teaching me how to be a man." I had signed the inside flap when I gave it back to him as a joke. Frank Miller, owner of one stubborn son. That signature had the same long tail on the F, the same break in the double L. Someone had copied it. I put the bill of sale in a folder. Then I went to the bedroom. Ruth's cedar chest sat at the foot of our bed. I had not opened it since the funeral. Some men clean too soon after losing a wife. Some never clean at all. I was somewhere in the middle. Her dresses were gone because my sister helped me donate them. But the chest stayed closed because it smelled like lavender, paper, and the part of my life where someone was waiting for me. My hands shook when I lifted the lid, not from weakness, from memory. Inside were quilts, letters, old photographs, and a metal lockbox. The pickup title was in that lockbox, exactly where Ruth had told me to keep it after we finished the restoration. I held it under the bedroom lamp. Title issued to Frank Miller. No lien. No co-owner. No Daniel. No Kristen. Just me. Under the title was an envelope with my name written in Ruth's hand. "Frank, if they start deciding for you." I sat on the edge of the bed. For a long minute I could not open it. Ruth had a way of seeing through people that used to irritate me. She was kind, but she was not soft. Folks mistook her gentle voice for innocence. That was their mistake. Ruth could sit through a whole dinner smiling politely and afterward tell me exactly who was lying, who was scared, who was showing off, and who had come to borrow money. Inside the envelope was a note. "Frank, I hope you never need this, but if you do not argue with them. Do not sign anything, because they say it is easier. Call Helen." Let the papers speak before your heart does. I noticed things before I got too tired to say them out loud. Daniel is still our boy, but he is weak around Kristen, and weakness can become cruelty when money is involved. The truck, the house, and the accounts are protected if anyone tries to pressure you. You are not helpless because I am gone. Love. Ruth. I read that note 3 times. Then I found Helen Carter's business card and a copy of our trust amendment. I remembered signing it. Barely. Ruth had been sick then. The lawyer came to the house because Ruth was too weak to sit in an office. I thought it was ordinary estate housekeeping, medical directives, beneficiaries, trustee updates. Things older couples do when illness starts moving furniture around in your life. But Ruth had added something. Helen later called it an elder protection clause. Ruth called it common sense. If any beneficiary attempted to coerce, defraud, medically misrepresent, isolate, redirect communications from, or obtain control over the surviving spouse's assets without written consent and independent legal review, that beneficiary could be suspended or removed from trust benefits. I sat there in the quiet bedroom with my dead wife's handwriting in one hand and the title to my stolen pickup in the other. They thought I was broken. But grief had not made me stupid. The next morning, Roy Blanchard came to my door. He was a thick man in a denim jacket, maybe 55, with a red face and an envelope in his hand. His truck was parked halfway in the street, like he had arrived with his temper driving. "You Frank Miller?" "I am." "I bought your truck." "No," I said. "You paid my son for my truck." His jaw tightened. "I paid $16,000 cash. He said you were sick, but you approved it. His wife said the title was in the house and would be mailed after you got settled." I opened the door wider. "Come in, Roy." He looked surprised. Most angry men expect another angry man. Calm confuses them. Roy sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee. He kept looking around like he expected Daniel to jump out from behind a curtain and hand him a title. I placed the original title in front of him. Roy stared at it. "That's real?" "It is." He rubbed both hands over his face. "Son of a gun." I slid the bill of sale copy beside it. "Is that what they gave you?" He pulled his envelope open and showed me his version. Same paper, same forged signature. Roy was not innocent exactly. A man buying an old truck for cash without a title knows he is stepping into mud. But he had not invented the mud. Daniel and Kristen had. He told me they met him in a grocery store parking lot. Daniel had the keys. Kristen had the paperwork. She did most of the talking. She said I was not emotionally ready to handle the sale and that the family was trying to reduce my burdens after Ruth's death. Then Roy said something I did not expect. She also said the truck was the first step. I looked at him. First step toward what? He shifted in his chair. "Getting you into a safer arrangement." Her words. I thought she meant assisted living or something. There it was. The truck was not the end. It was the test. If I accepted the lie, the next paper would come easier. Then the next. Then the next. Roy gave me copies of his text messages with Daniel. One message said, "Dad is on board but fragile. Best to move fast." Another said, "We need the truck gone before he comes home and changes his mind again." Again. That word was doing a lot of work. After Roy left, I called Helen Carter. She did not sound surprised. That hurt too. She said, "Frank, do not confront them further. Do not threaten. Do not accuse. Preserve everything. Bring Ruth's envelope, the title, the bill of sale, and any messages you have. Also, check whether you still have access to Ruth's tablet." "Her tablet?" "The dash camera system," Helen said. "Ruth mentioned it to me once. She said it uploaded clips when the truck started." I had forgotten. Years earlier, tools had disappeared from our driveway. A circular saw, 2 drills, a box of copper fittings. I wanted to blame teenagers. Ruth blamed convenience. She ordered a hidden dash camera system small enough to tuck under the rearview mirror, then made me install it on a Saturday I had planned to spend watching football. "It records when the engine starts," she had said. Who's going to steal from a truck this old? She looked at me over her glasses. People steal from old things because they think nobody is watching. Ruth was right more often than I liked admitting. Her tablet was in the desk drawer, dead as a stone. I charged it for an hour. When the screen lit up, her wallpaper appeared. The two of us at the lake, her scarf blowing across her face. Me, squinting like the sun owed me money. I opened the camera app. There were recent clips. I did not play them alone. Old men are quiet for a reason. Sometimes the reason is wisdom. Sometimes it is fear of what they already suspect. At Helen's office, we sat in a conference room with the blinds half closed. Helen had represented my business for years before Ruth asked her to help with our estate. She knew contracts. She knew families. Most importantly, she knew the difference between a mistake and a pattern. She plugged the tablet into a monitor. The first clip showed the inside of my pickup. Daniel was in the driver's seat. Kristen was beside him. The camera angle caught their profiles in the windshield. It was afternoon. The truck was parked in my driveway. I was in the hospital. Daniel held papers in his lap. Kristen said, "Just sign it for him." You know he would have agreed if he were thinking clearly. Daniel whispered, "This doesn't feel right." For one foolish second, my heart reached for him. Then Kristen said, "Daniel, your father is not going to manage this house forever. The truck is symbolic. If he fights over it, we can show the doctor how attached and confused he is." Daniel stared through the windshield. Then he said, "Once the truck is gone, it proves he can't keep track of assets." Helen paused the video. I looked at my hands. They were old hands, scarred knuckles, thick fingers, a small burn mark from a soldering iron in 1998. Ruth used to say she trusted my hands before she trusted my words, because my hands had always provided before my mouth knew how to explain love. Those hands had held Daniel when he was born. They had pushed his first baseball glove onto his hand. They had signed checks when he needed help with rent, when his car broke down, when his first business idea failed, when Kristen wanted a new roof, and Daniel said he was embarrassed to ask. I had never kept score. Maybe I should have. Helen said quietly, "Do you want to continue?" "Yes." She pressed play. Kristen said, "After this, we file the concern with Dr. Lasher. Then, we talk about power of attorney." Daniel said, "What if he asks for the title?" Kristen laughed once. "Then you say he misplaced it. That helps us too." The recording ended. Helen copied the files immediately. "Frank," she said, "this is more than a family dispute." "I know. We need your doctor to document capacity. We need the bank alerted. We need the postal issue checked. We need to see if any court filing has started. And we need you not to act angry." "I'm not angry," I said. Helen looked at me. I corrected myself. "I am angry, but I am not careless." That afternoon, we went to my bank. The branch manager, Marcia Green, had known me since my business days. She used to joke that I signed checks like a man afraid ink cost money. She did not joke when Helen explained why we were there. Marcia checked the account notes. Her face changed. "There was a login attempt 2 days ago," she said. "Online access. It failed security verification." "From where?" She hesitated. Helen said, "Marcia." Marcia printed the record. Daniel's email address had been entered as a recovery contact request. There was also a phone inquiry, asking what documents were needed for an adult child to become authorized on accounts in case of incapacity. Incapacity. There is a strange feeling when you see a word like that attached to your name by people who used to ask you for help reading loan documents. Marcia looked at me with genuine sadness. "I'm sorry, Frank." "Don't be," I said. "Just lock it down." She placed extra verification on every account. No online recovery changes without in-person confirmation. No authorized user without my physical presence, and Helen's office notified. She also printed a list of recent access attempts. Another paper for the folder. Some lessons are not taught with anger. Some lessons are taught with paperwork. The next evidence came from Earl. He knocked on my back door the following morning holding 2 envelopes. These came to my place by mistake, he said. Same house number, wrong street. Mailman's new. One envelope was from the Postal Service. It confirmed a mail forwarding request from my address to Daniel and Kristen's house. Effective immediately. I had not requested it. The second envelope was from a medical office confirming an appointment with Dr. Martin Lasher for a cognitive capacity evaluation. Reason for visit: family concern regarding confusion, unsafe driving, financial inconsistency, and memory issues after hospitalization. Unsafe driving, financial inconsistency, memory issues. They had built a story around the stolen truck. That was the moment I understood Kristen's patience. She had not been rushing because she was careless. She was rushing because each lie supported the next one. Sell the truck. Claim, I agreed. When I objected, call it confusion. Use the confusion to schedule a capacity exam. Use the exam to push power of attorney. Use power of attorney to control the bank, the house, and the trust. They thought old age was a weakness. They forgot old age is also a record. I had records for everything. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Ruth's envelope, the bank printout, the postal confirmation, and the medical letter spread in front of me. The house was quiet in that heavy way a house gets after a funeral, after visitors stop coming and casseroles stop appearing. I remembered Daniel at 17, standing in the garage beside the pickup, helping me replace the alternator. He had been impatient, like most boys are, turning the wrench too fast and rounding the bolt. I snapped at him. He threw the wrench down. Then Ruth walked in with lemonade and said, "The truck is not the lesson, patience is." Daniel picked the wrench back up. An hour later, the engine turned over. He looked at me like I had handed him fire. "Dad," he said, "one day I'm going to build things like you." I had believed him. That memory stayed with me longer than the recording. Because the recording showed what he had done. The memory showed what had been lost. The following afternoon, my grandson Caleb came by. He was 19, tall, awkward, with Daniel's eyes and Ruth's quiet way of standing in a doorway before entering a room. Caleb had visited me twice in the hospital. He brought a crossword book and a terrible sandwich from the cafeteria because he said the soup looked like punishment. Daniel had not visited alone. Kristen came once and spent most of the time looking at my discharge board. Caleb stood in my kitchen holding his baseball cap. "Grandpa," he said, "I need to tell you something." I pulled out a chair. He sat, but barely. "Mom said not to come over here without her." "That sounds like your mother." He looked down. "I heard her talking to Dad. She said they had to get you stabilized before you changed the will." I said nothing. Caleb reached into his hoodie and pulled out a USB drive. I know I shouldn't have copied stuff, but the family computer at home still has Dad's email open sometimes. Mom was emailing a real estate agent. He placed the drive on the table. She sent pictures of your house, the garage, the backyard. She asked for a valuation if the property was sold as is, after elder transition. Elder transition. People do love clean phrases for dirty intentions. Caleb's eyes filled, but he did not cry. "Grandpa, did Dad really sell the truck?" "Yes." "Did you tell him to?" "No." He nodded like he already knew but needed the pain confirmed. Then he said something that almost broke me. "When I was little, Dad used to tell me you could fix anything." I looked toward the window where the empty driveway sat in the afternoon sun. "Some things," I said, "are not fixed by putting them back the way they were. Some things are fixed by telling the truth about how they broke." Caleb stayed for dinner. We ate canned soup because I was too tired to cook and because Ruth was not there to make something decent out of whatever was left in the fridge. Before he left, he hugged me hard. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I wanted to tell him he had nothing to be sorry for. But children and grandchildren often apologize for the sins of the house they live in. Helen used Caleb's USB drive carefully. She did not want him dragged into anything more than necessary. The emails showed Kristen had contacted a real estate agent while I was still in the hospital. She wrote that the elderly owner is not ready to list yet, but family expects authority soon. Authority. Not consent. Authority. There was also a draft message to Daniel. Once POA is signed, we need immediate access to statements and deed records. Do not let Frank talk to Helen alone. That told us something important. Kristen knew about Helen. She knew Ruth had prepared something. She just did not know what. 2 days later, Daniel called. His voice was soft. Too soft. Dad, we need to talk. I'm listening. Kristen and I think we started this wrong. That sentence had hinges on it. I waited to see which way it would swing. He continued. We should have included you more. But you scared us. The hospital scared us. You're alone in that house. You're forgetting things. What have I forgotten? He was quiet. The truck, he said finally. No, I said. I remember the truck. He sighed. See? This is what I mean. You're stuck on it. I looked at Ruth's note, sitting on the table beside me. Daniel said, Kristen set up a meeting with a family attorney. Not Helen. Someone neutral. We just want to put protections in place. When? Friday morning. What kind of protections? Power of attorney. Medical coordination. Financial backup. Normal stuff. Normal stuff. A son sells his father's pickup with a forged signature, redirects his mail, tries to access his bank, schedules a capacity exam, talks to a real estate agent, and then calls power of attorney normal stuff. I said, all right. Daniel exhaled like he had won. Really? I'm tired, Daniel. That part was true. I don't want to fight. That part was also true. He mistook both truths for surrender. That was their next mistake. Friday morning, Kristen arrived wearing a navy dress and a smile that belonged on a brochure. Daniel drove. He opened the back door for me like I had become cargo. I brought my cane even though I did not need it that day. I let my steps look slower than they were. Kristen noticed. People like her always notice weakness, whether real or performed. She touched my elbow as if guiding me. You're doing the right thing, Frank, she said. A peaceful transition is better than an embarrassing fight. I looked at Daniel. He looked away. At the attorney's office, a young man named Peter Walsh greeted us. He had a soft handshake and the uneasy politeness of someone who had been told only one side of a family story. Kristen did most of the talking. Frank has been through so much, she said. Losing Ruth, then the hospital. Daniel is the only child. We just need authority to help him manage safely. Peter nodded. Daniel stared at the table. Kristen slid a document toward me. Durable power of attorney. Broad authority. Financial accounts. Real estate. Vehicle transactions. Insurance matters. Mail handling. Medical records. Legal claims. It was not help. It was the steering wheel of my life. Kristen placed a pen beside my hand. Just sign here, Frank. Then we can stop all this confusion. I picked up the pen. Daniel's breathing changed. Kristen leaned forward. I let the silence stretch. Then I placed the pen down, straightened it carefully, and said, Before I sign anything, I'd like my lawyer to join us. The door opened. Helen Carter walked in. She carried a leather briefcase and the expression of a woman who had never once confused politeness with weakness. Daniel went pale. Kristen's smile disappeared so quickly it was almost honest. Peter Walsh stood. I wasn't aware Mr. Miller had counsel. Helen said, That is one of several things you were not made aware of. She sat beside me and opened her briefcase. One by one, she placed documents on the table. The original pickup title, the forged bill of sale, Roy Blanchard's written statement, the bank login records, the mail forwarding confirmation, the medical appointment notice, the real estate emails, then Ruth's trust amendment. Kristen recovered first. This is unnecessary, she said. We are not enemies here. Helen looked at her. Mrs. Miller, enemies are not defined by volume. They are defined by conduct. Daniel covered his face with one hand. Helen turned to Peter. Your client has attempted to obtain broad authority over Mr. Miller's assets while omitting material facts, including an unauthorized sale of his vehicle without title, a forged signature, a mail redirection, a bank access attempt, and a scheduled capacity evaluation based on a dispute your clients created. Peter looked at Kristen. Kristen said, "That is a malicious interpretation." Helen opened the trust amendment. Frank and Ruth Miller's trust includes an elder protection clause. Any beneficiary who attempts to coerce, defraud, isolate, medically misrepresent, or obtain control over the surviving spouse's property without consent, an independent legal review may have beneficiary rights suspended pending review and may be removed from fiduciary roles. Not, Daniel whispered. Mom did that? I looked at him for the first time since entering the room. Your mother saw more than I did. His face crumpled, not fully. Men like Daniel often cry halfway because the other half is still defending itself. Kristen slapped her palm on the table. She had cancer. She was paranoid. The room went still. I felt my pulse in my throat. Helen's voice turned cold. You will not insult Ruth Miller in front of her husband and improve your legal position at the same time. Peter Walsh quietly removed the power of attorney document from in front of me. Kristen saw control slipping away and did what controlling people do when charm fails. She threatened, "If Frank refuses help and something happens to him, that is on all of you. We will seek guardianship if necessary." Helen closed the folder. "Then we will see you in court." And we did. Kristen filed for emergency guardianship 10 days later. The petition said I was confused, financially vulnerable, unsafe with vehicles, resistant to family support, and possibly subject to delusions regarding a truck sale. Delusions. That word sat in the paperwork like a stain. My doctor, Dr. Patel, examined me 2 days before the hearing. He had treated me for years. He asked memory questions, reviewed my medications, checked my oxygen, and then looked me in the eye. "Frank, do you understand what your son is trying to do?" "Yes." "Can you manage your accounts?" I have since before Daniel knew what money was. He almost smiled, then caught himself. His letter stated clearly that I was medically recovering, cognitively intact, oriented, and capable of making my own financial and legal decisions. Another paper for the folder. By then, the pickup had been located in Roy Blanchard's barn. Roy had not driven it much after the DMV refused transfer. To his credit, he cooperated. He wanted his money back and his name out of the mess. The court hearing was held on a Tuesday morning. Not dramatic. No crowd. No shouting. Just fluorescent lights, wooden benches, legal pads, and the kind of quiet where people's true character has nowhere to hide. Kristen wore pale gray. Daniel wore the same navy suit from the lawyer's office. Caleb sat behind me with Earl. Helen sat beside me. I kept Ruth's note folded in my jacket pocket. The judge let Kristen speak first. She was good. I will give her that. She did not sound greedy. She sounded concerned. She described me as proud, grieving, isolated, resistant. She said Daniel had only tried to help. She said the truck sale had been discussed multiple times, but I later forgot. She said my fixation on the title showed I could not see the bigger picture. Then Daniel spoke. Softly. He said, "My father is a strong man, but he's not the same since Mom died. I'm worried about him." The judge asked, "Did your father authorize you to sell the truck?" Daniel looked at Kristen. Then he looked down. "Yes," he said. "It is a strange thing to watch your grown son lie under oath. You do not stop loving him in that instant. It is worse than that. You remember every time you taught him the truth mattered, and you realize he heard you, understood you, and chose otherwise." Helen stood. She did not attack. Good lawyers do not always attack. Sometimes they simply open the door and let facts walk in. She began with the title. My client remained the sole titled owner of the vehicle. No valid title transfer occurred. Then Roy's statement. The buyer confirms Daniel and Kristen Miller represented that title would be provided later because Frank was too ill to manage paperwork. Then the forged bill of sale. We have significant concerns regarding the signature. Then bank records. An attempted recovery change using Daniel Miller's email. Then, The mail forwarding request. Not authorized by Frank Miller. Then the medical appointment. Scheduled without Mr. Miller's consent and based partly on the very vehicle dispute created by the petitioners. Then Dr. Patel's letter. Cognitively intact, capable, oriented, no basis for emergency guardianship. Kristen sat stiffly. Daniel looked smaller with every page. But Helen saved the recording for last. "Your Honor," she said, "there is also contemporaneous audio and video recorded inside the vehicle by a dash camera system installed years earlier by Ruth Miller." Kristen stood halfway. "Absolutely not. That is private family conversation." The judge looked at her. "In a truck you claim was lawfully sold?" Kristen sat down. Helen pressed play. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then Daniel's voice filled the room. "This doesn't feel right." Kristen's voice followed. "Daniel, your father is not going to manage this house forever. The truck is symbolic. If he fights over it, we can show the doctor how attached and confused he is." I watched the judge's face. Then Daniel's recorded voice said, "Once the truck is gone, it proves he can't keep track of assets." Kristen stared straight ahead. Helen let it continue. "After this, we file the concern with Dr. Lasher. Then we talk about power of attorney." Daniel whispered in the recording, "What if he asks for the title?" Kristen laughed. "Then you say he misplaced it. That helps us too." Helen stopped the recording. Silence sat in that courtroom like a verdict before the judge ever spoke. Daniel began crying. Not loudly. Just a broken sound that came out of him once, then again. He covered his mouth with his fist. Kristen turned on him in a whisper. "Stop it." But he could not. The judge denied the emergency guardianship. He found no evidence that I lacked capacity. He warned Daniel and Kristen against further interference with my mail, finances, medical care, or property. He referred the forged vehicle documents and unauthorized mail forwarding issues for appropriate review. He advised all parties that any future petition would need to address the evidence of bad faith presented that day. Bad faith. That is a clean legal phrase. It means someone tried to dress greed as concern. The trust review happened after that. Helen sent formal notices. Daniel's authority as successor trustee was suspended. His beneficiary status was placed under review. Kristen had no direct inheritance right, but she lost the one thing she wanted most: access through him. The bank kept the restrictions. The postal forwarding was canceled. Dr. Lasher's appointment was canceled. Peter Walsh withdrew from representing Daniel and Kristen in the power of attorney matter. Roy got his money back through Daniel and Kristen, after Helen made clear that a civil claim would be the softer path compared to what could come next. The pickup was returned to my driveway on a flatbed truck 2 weeks after the hearing. I stood on the porch as it rolled in. Same green paint. Same chrome bumper. Same scratch on the passenger door. Earl stood beside me, arms crossed. "Truck looks better than your family," he said. I looked at him. He shrugged. "Too soon?" "No," I said. "Accurate." When the driver unloaded it, I walked around the truck slowly. My hand rested on the hood. Cold metal. Real. Returned. But not unchanged. Nothing returns unchanged after betrayal. Daniel came by 3 days later. Alone. He looked tired, older, ashamed in a way that had finally reached his bones. I let him in because he was my son. I did not offer coffee because I was not ready to pretend. He stood in the kitchen, looking at Ruth's cardigan on the chair. "I'm sorry," he said. I waited. He cried then, fully, like he had been holding water behind a cracked wall. He told me Kristen had pushed. He told me the bills had gotten bad. Credit cards, home equity, private school deposits they could not afford. A life built to impress people who would not have crossed the street to help them. He told me he convinced himself it was temporary, that once he had control, he would manage things responsibly. That is how weak men excuse theft. They rename it management. I listened. When he finished, I said, "Do you remember the first time I let you steer the pickup?" He wiped his face. "Yeah. You were 10. We were on the farm road behind your grandfather's place. You sat on my lap because your feet couldn't reach the pedals. He smiled a little through the shame. You said I was doing good. You were terrible, I said. You nearly put us in a ditch. He laughed once. Then his face fell. I said, but you were honest. You said, Dad, I'm scared. So I helped you hold the wheel. Hey. He looked at me. This time, Daniel, you were scared and lied about who was driving. He nodded. I know. No, I said. You know you got caught. Knowing what you did will take longer. He asked if I could forgive him. That was the hardest question. Not because the answer was no. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same tool. I am working on not hating you, I said. That is what I can honestly offer today. He accepted that like a man accepting a smaller meal than he wanted because he knew he had not earned a feast. Kristen did not come back. A month later, Daniel told me they were separating. I did not celebrate. I had learned too much about quiet destruction to cheer when a house breaks. Caleb moved into a small apartment near his college. I helped with the deposit, not because he asked, because Ruth would have. I updated my estate plan, not out of spite, out of clarity. Daniel was removed from any control position. What he may receive someday was placed behind conditions that required time, accountability, and distance from financial authority. Caleb was named to receive the pickup, but not until I am done driving it. Helen helped me create a small scholarship fund in Ruth's name for students from our county going into nursing. Hospice nurses had kept my wife comfortable when cancer had taken everything else it could reach. That felt right. The house stayed mine. The accounts stayed protected. The truck stayed in the driveway. And Ruth's note stayed in the glove compartment, sealed in a plastic sleeve beside the registration. The first Sunday I felt strong enough, I drove the pickup to the cemetery. The engine turned over on the second try. It always did like to make me ask twice. I drove with the windows cracked, past the hardware store, past the high school, past the church where Daniel once played a shepherd in a Christmas pageant and forgot his only line. The cemetery was quiet. Ruth Stone sat under an oak tree. I parked nearby and carried 2 cups of coffee, one black and one with cream, the way she liked it. I sat on the grass, though getting down was easier than getting back up. Well, I said to her, Stone, you were right. The wind moved through the oak leaves. I told her about the court, about Daniel crying, about Caleb being brave, about the scholarship, about the truck coming home. Then I took her note from my pocket and read it again. You are not helpless because I am gone. I folded it carefully. For the first time in months, the silence beside me did not feel empty. It felt guarded. On the way home, I stopped by the lake. Ruth and I used to park there when we needed to make decisions too big for the kitchen. I sat in the truck and watched the water move under a gray sky. I thought about Daniel as a boy, asleep against the passenger door after fishing. I thought about Daniel as a man, sitting in court, while his own words came back to claim him. I thought about Kristen's polished voice saying she wanted to protect me from myself. People like that always think older men are easy to move. They see the slower walk, the pill bottles, the quiet house, the empty chair at the table. They mistake grief for confusion. They mistake manners for surrender. They mistake silence for weakness. But silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is a man counting every lie. Sometimes it is a father giving his son one last chance to tell the truth. And sometimes it is a widower letting the woman he loved speak through the papers she left behind. I drove home before dark. The pickup settled into its old place beside the garage. I turned off the engine and sat there with my hand on the wheel. My son sold my pickup while I was in the hospital because he thought an old man would not know what was missing. But he forgot I still had the title, and he forgot the truck remembered everything.